Hi, Jane Schnupp here with another Savvy Sightseer video vacation. Lisbon, bustling beauty. On this latest addition to the European Destination Travelogues, we are heading to our closest neighbor across the sea. If you draw a straight line east from New York, the first European country you'll come to is Portugal on the Iberian Peninsula. Its capital, Lisbon, has always been a busy harbor town since it was first established by the Phoenicians way back in around 1200 BCE. They had decided its location would serve them well as a prime trading center. They named their city Elis Ubau, or Calm Port, which eventually is believed to have morphed into Lisboa, as the locals still call their capital. It predates more familiar ancient capitals like Rome. In fact, it is one of the oldest cities in Western Europe, continually settled since the Iron Age. According to Google, Lisbon snagged a spot in the top 10 of its destination searches during 2022. In a country famous for exploring, a prime place to explore ashore is its capital, as we say, Lisbon. First and foremost, Lisbon wants the world to remember it is one of the earliest truly global cities, the capital of an empire that spread over all continents, from South America to Asia. Intercontinental travel is taken for granted these days, but back in the 15th century it was unthought of until brave and adventurous Portuguese explorers struck out on uncharted seas in search of new trading routes, wealth, and knowledge. They had set sail from Lisbon on the Tagus River into the Atlantic, and overlooking their departure point today are two key tributes to the heroes who made Portugal a world leader and an enormously wealthy country. This 515-foot diameter compass rose embedded in pavement at the river's edge depicts the far reaching sea routes traveled by Portuguese explorers during what became known as the Age of Discovery. At the center of the rose, key dates and caravels, or small, distinctive sailing ships developed by Portuguese specifically to undertake long trips, mark the main routes of the Portuguese expansion between the 15th and 16th centuries. 5 small compass roses, 3 blowing faces personifying the wind, a mermaid, a mythical fish, and Neptune with a trident and a trumpet riding a marine beast add to the colorful mosaic. The artwork was a gift from the Republic of South Africa, once a colony of Portugal, to mark the 500th anniversary of the death of the man credited with being the genesis behind the era of exploration, Prince Henry the Navigator. It is part of a grand square leading up to the other key tribute along the Tagus, the Monument of the Discoveries. Jutting out over the edge of the river is this striking memorial, with the prince holding a model of the caravel that made long-range travel possible. He stands at the forefront of a prestigious group of Portugal's finest, a cluster of 32 navigators, cartographers, warriors, colonizers, missionaries, historians, and artists that line both sides of the ship-shaped 184-foot tall sculpture. Installed in 1960, it is a replica of a former temporary tribute created for the 1940 Portuguese World Exhibition. Among the group of likenesses are those we have learned about in grade school. Bartholomew Dias, the first to sail around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa to identify a gateway between Europe and India in 1488. Vasco da Gama, who followed in 1497 and then went on to sail all the way to India and establish the route of spices, which propelled Portugal's colonial and commercial expansion, leading it to be recognized the world over as a great naval power. And then there's the acclaimed Portuguese navigator, Ferdinand Magellan, who went on to plan and lead the first successful effort to circumnavigate the world in 1519. Although he did so under the Spanish flag, Portugal is nonetheless proud to include this native son as a member of its notables. He stands fourth behind Prince Henry holding a broken sphere, symbolizing his around-the-world venture, and the fact that he died before completing it. There's only one female in the group, Henry's mother. Despite his title, Henry was neither much of a navigator nor even a sailor. Legend has it he was kind of prone to seasickness. But he is recognized as being the driving force, enabling and inspiring others to achieve greatness on the open seas. Also along the shorefront is the Belém Tower, constructed on the northern bank of the Tagus River between 1514 and 1520. Its purpose was to defend the city with 17 openings for cannons. It is a main symbol of Portugal's global expansion. The 98-foot tower, made of a local limestone, is located where the Tagus River, the longest river on the Iberian Peninsula, meets the Atlantic Ocean. Mariners arrived in or departed from Lisbon from its beach. Just behind the tower is tangible proof of the vast riches Portugal's explorers brought back to the tiny country, the Hieronymus Monastery, where the remains of Vasco da Gama are interred. A stroll through the adjacent cloisters, listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1983, is a study in excess. Built in 1501, with the riches brought back from world exploration, mostly from trade with India, the complex is a giant thank you to God for providing Portugal's success. The sprawling complex is laden with symbols of Portugal's seafaring days, such as seahorses, elephants, ropes, shells, and navigation tools, all exquisitely wrought in stone and enshrining Portugal's place as the foremost maritime power of the 16th century. It was built on the site of a former chapel where Vasco da Gama and the rest of the sailors prayed before setting sail down the African coast to India. The monks who lived there were charged with praying for the soul of the king as well as for the seafarers leaving Lisbon. The giant compass rose embedded in the Age of Discovery Square is just one of many distinctive paving features throughout Lisbon and one of the city's greatest attractions. The black and white tapestry, simply called Portuguese pavement, embellishes the city with distinctive patterns, most of which bring to mind the seas and epic voyages of the Portuguese discoveries. They are as emblematic to Lisbon as the Eiffel Tower is to Paris. While there is some evidence of similar paving being installed back in the 15th century, likely inspired by Roman mosaics, the works we see today started popping up during the 19th century. At Rocio Square here, about 64,600 square feet of paving in a pattern of waves is overwhelming enough to give you a touch of vertigo or bring on a bout of seasickness. City council members have suggested the unique urban art be considered for inclusion on UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List. This bit of street art incorporates both mosaic paving and sculpture in a tribute to the men who did the backbreaking work of laying the designs. But as beautiful and unique as the street art is, it's also increasingly a cause for concern. On one hand, the black and white limestone cubes allow for rainwater to seep through to feed the aquifers below. City Hall, though, wants to replace a few stretches of them with concrete, a seemingly sensible decision that has sparked outrage. For starters, without regular treatment, the Portuguese paving is lethally slippery when wet. Add to risk of slipping the general state of disrepair and lack of skilled craftspeople capable of properly repaving or repairing the pavements, and you've got accidents waiting to happen all over. Uneven cobblestone sidewalks with potholes are also far from ideal for wheels of any size, whether we're talking suitcases, strollers, or wheelchairs. Suggestions to tear up Lisbon's pavements in favor of safer surfaces are the basis of hotly debated topic with passionate advocates on both sides of the argument. Lisbon City Council has already installed strips of concrete on some sidewalks and will be replacing the cobbled pavements on especially steep hills with non-slip solutions. But it's the very nature of these streets and sidewalks, their steepness and unevenness. Whether concrete or limestone, they are hard to traverse, as I can personally attest to when I made a sudden, albeit graceful, descent onto the pavement. While keeping an eye out for what artwork passes beneath your feet, you have to remember to also look up and out in the city for some other stunning views. Given that Lisbon, like Rome, is said to have been built on 7 hills. There's tiered vistas all around town, so you can easily and safely take in the eye candy views, such as here at the overlook of Santa Lucia. This terrace offers a fantastic panoramic view across Lisbon, taking in the old quarters and castle as well as the downtown district and river. Of the many viewing platforms throughout the city, this is one of the most trafficked by tourists and locals alike. One spectacular view is from the top of 62-acre Eduardo VII Park, looking down one of the highest hills in the city toward the Tagus River. Originally called the Park of Liberty, this patch of greenery was developed at the end of the 19th century. It was renamed in 1903 to honor visiting British King Edward VII, who was in town to celebrate the Anglo-Portuguese alliance, more than 5 centuries old at the time. The relationship, formed when the two nations signed a treaty back in the 14th century, is the oldest such agreement in the world still in force. Within the park is a truly delightfully unexpected experience. The so called cold greenhouse, given that no warming system is used, is a literal oasis of peace and beauty within the city center. On the grounds of the Parque Eduardo, the 2-acre Estufa Fria was developed on the site of an ancient basalt quarry starting in 1910 and eventually opening to the public in the early 1930s. Man made water spaces, exotic plantings, and tucked away coves invite relaxation and contemplation. Plant species from around the globe, including Australia, Brazil, Korea, Mexico, and Peru, fill the former quarry. Statuary and ornamental stones make good use of remaining volcanic rock. Also within the complex are 2 additional greenhouses. One, a warm facility that houses tropical plants, such as bananas, coffee, and mango trees, and the other, a so called sweet greenhouse, where cacti are propagated. Developers promote the spaces as vegetal museums, where time goes by slowly and pleasantly. At the base of the park is a monumental tribute to the man most closely associated with rebuilding the city after a disastrous earthquake in 1755 that leveled much of the town and led to a catastrophic tsunami with 30-foot waves, followed by 5 days of fires. It is considered one of the most destructive and deadly earthquakes in history, with its impact felt as far away as Ireland. The entire city centre, the Baixa, ceased to exist. Estimates of those who died vary widely, but a standard guesstimate is upwards of 60,000 people in Lisbon alone who perished, and some 12,000 buildings that tumbled. A powerful and determined Portuguese statesman, who became known as the Marquis de Pombal, emerged as the impetus and visionary to rebuild the city. He epitomized the Age of Enlightenment and was credited with progressing educational, political, and agricultural reforms, all reflected allegorically in the monument. Pombal's plan for New Lisbon was to reflect a society in which the citizen, the merchant, and the bureaucrat took precedence over the crown, church, and nobility, according to a report on the city's reconstruction. The work is a marvel of sculpting, chock full of symbolism, especially around its bottom, including the prow of a ship with Portugal's coat of arms, farmers at work, seafarers with their haul, and, all importantly, a figure emerging from under toppled buildings. Pombal's bronze likeness stares down from atop his 131-foot high perch to take in the city he laid out in an innovative grid format, with wide streets and open squares, replacing the former convoluted and twisting narrow streets. One prominent feature of the modernized city is the broad boulevard stretching from Pombal's memorial for about a mile toward the river. Before the 1755 earthquake, this area was a wealthy region of the city, a park where Lisbon's privileged would take their daily walk, passing fountains and statues. Pombal redesigned it and styled the walkway after Paris's stately Champs-Élysées, but he planned it only for the rich of Lisbon. The tree-lined avenue had high walls and massive gates at both ends to keep the commoners out of the elite private area. That changed in 1821 when the king ordered the gates removed and opened the street to the general public. It was named Avenue of Liberty. It is still an upscale address and considered one of the chicest shopping centers for the high fashion set. Gucci, Dior, Stella McCartney, Versace, and many more fashion giants launched their Portuguese flagship storefronts right here. Since the late 1800s, the 300-foot wide avenue has been enhanced with fountains and water features. Two pools running the length of the plazas represent Portugal's two major rivers, the Tagus and the Douro. Roads and formal gardens, statues, and other tributes line the route, as well as sidewalks, of course, featuring those black and white mosaics. Doubtless Pombal would have approved of this addition in his ritzy plans, just a block off Avenue of Liberty. In 1943, highly successful businessman Antonio de Medeiros e Almeida purchased this Parisian-style mansion, built in 1896 by a wealthy Lisbon lawyer. For the next 3 years, he remodeled and modernized it, turning it into a showcase home fit to display his growing fine arts collection. By the 1960s, Almeida considered his collection important enough that he decided to move into a neighboring building while he further redesigned his home into a bona fide museum he could bequeath to the country. He even converted the private garden in the 1970s into an additional wing with 13 more rooms for the expanding collection. He passed away in 1986. More renovations were undertaken to prepare the building for public access, and it finally opened as a museum in 2001. The house is divided into two different areas. In the old wing that was inhabited by the Almeida couple, we can see just how they lived, since everything was left untouched. For a time, this was a thoroughly modern home, steeped in the lap of luxury. An impressive library is stacked full of books collected by Almeida. On the museum side, his eclectic and cosmopolitan taste is on full display in over 20 galleries. Some 2,000 pieces span all genres: furniture, paintings by the masters, sculptures, textiles, and sacred art dating from the 2nd century BC to the 20th century CE. Among the varied collections are items such as these in the upper left, a secretary, similar to a roll-top desk but with the cubbies to the side. In the upper right is a chest of Austrian cut rock crystal. It is a 19th century reboot of a Venetian wedding chest for a bride's trousseau to be paraded through the street to the groom's home, putting the bride's impressively wealthy dowry on display. Below that is a tea set reportedly used by Napoleon while he was in exile. And in the lower left is something surely every table needs: a very unusual boar's head tureen and ladle from the Qing dynasty. 4 collections are highlighted in specific galleries: Chinese ceramics, silverworks, fans, and clocks. In addition to being featured in every room in the house, timepieces of all types can be admired in the clock room, from standalone ones to cases filled with pocket watches. Center stage in this room is a marvelous clock that was a gift from Prince Louis of Bavaria to his cousin Sisi, Empress of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's topped by a white peacock, symbol of the Bavarian princes, and the rest is a mixture of crystal and lapis lazuli mounted on silver. It's a precious masterpiece that still operates today. A truly different type of timepiece in the collection is the night clock, by a former royal clockmaker to King Charles II. A lamp burns inside that displays the time during the night. Made with ebony, gilded bronze, brass, metal, and glass, the timepiece has no hands. Time is determined from a display through a semicircular opening on the dial, where a disc with Arabic numerals passes. The minutes are marked on the outside of the half arch in Roman numerals: 1 for a quarter of an hour, 2 for half an hour, and 3 for 3/4 of an hour. The new time shows on the left side, completing the semicircle until it disappears on the right. The elaborate work had belonged to the Princess of Portugal, who became Queen of England by marriage to Charles II in 1662. The massive lake room is, I believe, the museum's most beautiful space. Its walls are covered with Baroque tile panels representing each continent and the four seasons. At the center is a marble and bronze fountain, which originally stood in the gardens of the Palace of Versailles in Paris, France. From modern and posh, a short walk from the Avenue of Liberty plunges you into a long ago past, a sharp contrast from the carefully and symmetrically laid out swanky city center Pombal designed. This area, built high on solid bedrock and so spared the 1755 shakeup and subsequent tsunami, is the ancient Alfama district. It is Lisbon's oldest neighborhood and dates back as far as 1150. It's been likened to a village within a city and is still characterized by narrow streets, tiny squares, churches, and whitewashed houses, with wrought iron balconies festively adorned with pots of flowers and drying laundry. The typical Portuguese household has a clothes washer, but conspicuously missing is a dryer. These devices are considered unnecessary wastes of space and energy. The climate is such that it is low in humidity and certainly breezy enough for clothes to quickly dry on a line or rack attached to every apartment. Clustered around the highest hill in Lisbon, the district lies in the shadow of the Castle of St. George, one of many that has occupied the site since Romans first built a fortification there in 48 BC. Later it changed hands to the Visigoths, and then in the 8th century to the Moors, who built up the district and named it Ahama, meaning springs or bath, a reference to the fountains and hot springs found in the area. The Moors were also responsible for creating its intriguing atmosphere, with a labyrinth web of streets built as a defense system, designed to confound and slow down invaders. An added benefit of the closeness of their homes was that it blocked out some sun to remain cool in the summer. The sharp contrast between sections in the Alfama is best seen with this shot. From the water's edge, the Moors built until hitting literally a stone wall. Then they went up to the next elevation and started building again, making invaders easy marks from defenders above. But for the 21st century residents and visitors, those dizzying altitude changes can be pretty tough on the legs. So there are a few unique ways of getting around town. Funiculars or elevators, electric trams, and now tuk-tuk carts. Inaugurated in 1885 and recognized as a National Historic Site in 2002, the Elevator de Gloria in the upper left is a famous Lisbon funicular that features antiquated, partially wooden streetcars that can manage the nearly vertical climbs trolleys or trams can't. The elevator navigates the steep incline for about 900 feet and takes only about 3 minutes, passing beside a town-sanctioned string of street art along the way. In the upper right, we have historic tram number 28, which passes through some of the best-known tourist destinations, making it a popular and very crowded tram route. Some consider the 1930s era quaint yellow transport a must-ride feature in the city. Associated more with exotic destinations like Thailand, tuk-tuks are motorized three-wheelers that have now become a common sight, easily navigating the Alfama's narrow, twisting streets. Its maze of cobbled alleys, steps, and small squares is just as it was centuries ago. The quaintness of the Alfama has influenced poets and novelists, as well as fado singers. Fado is a song type, particular to the Portuguese, that is characterized by melancholy themes and stems from the Portuguese word for fate or destiny. The music style, imbued with a sense of longing, can be traced to the 1820s in Lisbon. The nicest pastime in this region is just to wander around and enjoy coming upon river views and finding incredibly picturesque scenes, and some pretty interesting architectural surprises, like the Casa dos Bicos, built in 1523. It was home to the Viceroy of Portuguese India. The name House of Spikes or Beaks is due to the facade, which is covered in over 1,000 diamond shaped stones. Today, the Casa is an archaeological center that traces Lisbon life over the past 2,000 years, as well as an exhibition space dedicated to the life and work of a local Nobel Prize author. Also prominent in this neighborhood are buildings covered in distinctive tilework. Not only do the tiles provide stunning visuals, they protect the building from dampness of Atlantic winters and keep interiors cool in summer. Durable, waterproof, and easily cleaned, the ideal exterior. Use of tiles on the town's buildings goes back centuries. They were first introduced to the Iberian Peninsula by the Moors, who ruled the region for hundreds of years. Since the predominant tile color today is blue, it is mistakenly believed by some that the Portuguese term for these particular tiles, azulo, is a derivation of azul, Portuguese for blue. However, the word is actually Arabic in origin and translates as small, polished stone. One of the most ornate tile facades graces this former home of a Lisbon native who had made his fortune in Brazil. When he returned to Portugal in 1909, the coffee magnate showed off his wealth by constructing an opulent Brazilian Art Nouveau mansion on the site of a former palace. The mansion sits atop a huge 13th century fountain, the oldest city spring and the first public fountain in Lisbon. It had channeled waters from the Alfama slope to provide clean drinking water to locals. In its heyday, the so-called King's Fountain had 9 working spouts, each with a different purpose. One for filling all kinds of jugs and barrels, others only for specific social groups such as sailors. Today, the opulent home is a boutique hotel with only 6 suites overlooking the harbor. To learn more about the history of these distinctive decorations, a visit to the National Tile Museum is a must, as well as intensely interesting. It occupies a former convent founded in 1509 by Queen Leonor. The collections take visitors on a journey through the history of tile, from 15th century till present day. The first tile designs were geometric, following the Moorish tradition that man cannot attempt to render human likenesses. During the 17th century, tile designs evolved to be more decorative. Often blue and white, but now also multicolored, depicting Christian motifs, imagery, hunting, as well as city scenes, history, culture, and daily routines. And then there's this room. I'm still trying to work out its symbolism. The museum's showpiece is a 75-foot long wraparound illustration of Lisbon from before the earthquake of 1755. 1,300 blue and white tiles were used in the Great Panorama of Lisbon, reportedly the country's longest tile piece. It offers the most complete view of Lisbon from the River Tagus, across about 8.5 miles of coastline from the west to the most eastern part of the city, portraying palaces, churches, convents, and dwellings. Essentially, a day in the life of Lisbon at the start of the 1700s. It originally encircled an entire room at a noble's palace in Lisbon and was later donated to the city. It's been dated to roughly 1700, given the artist, Spanish painter Gabriel del Barco, was believed to have first arrived in Lisbon in 1669 and died there in 1703. Some of the landmarks illustrated still exist, like the 16th century Belém Tower and the Hieronymus Monastery seen earlier. Some important business activities are depicted, such as the naval yards and maritime trade. Ordinary daily activities like a working mill, potteries as shown by a number of smoking chimneys. A galleon flying the Portuguese flag can be seen offshore, suggesting Lisbon's important role in trade. And of course, there's a local market for fruits, vegetables, and fish. A modern rendition shows a very different shorefront. Pombal's grid plan is clearly evident, and the missing huge castle, replaced with the open plaza of commerce, mark the starkest differences pre versus post-earthquake. One thing Pombal didn't envision in his new city design was the Santa Justa elevator. That wasn't added until 1902 by an architect who had studied under Gustav Eiffel. So, not surprisingly, the 150-foot tall industrial age iron elevator reminds some of Paris's Eiffel Tower, though this structure is more functional. There is a sharp incline between the Baixa or lower town to the Barro Alto, the upper town, at the top of one of the higher hills in Lisbon, and this addition was welcomed as the fastest and most comfortable way to get between the two. The observation deck offers spectacular views of the Baixa down below and accentuates the difference in altitude. During the day, the Barro Alto is relatively quiet, with some historical sites that invite daytime tourists. A key one is the magnificent ruin of the convent of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, once Lisbon's greatest medieval building. The structure is still standing, but was gutted by the devastating earthquake of 1755. Pombal made the decision to leave it in ruins as a permanent reminder of the disastrous event. Its roof had collapsed on the congregation as they were attending Mass on that fateful All Saints' Day. But when the sun goes down, the bohemian side of the region comes to life. Lisbon's so-called party district is chock full of lively restaurants and bars. Dishes served up likely in profusion at any eatery would include seafood. The Portuguese are the biggest fish consumers in the European Union. More than 200 different species of fish pass through the country's fish auctions. According to CNN, the destination of choice for food lovers should be Portugal. Some entrees Americans would probably not be familiar with include goose barnacles. This delicacy is very popular in Portugal. Then there's sea urchin, which is known as Portuguese caviar. From the starfish family, these are covered in long spines. On the not seafood side of the menu, there's the famous pork ear salad, or another option, a dish of cow's hoof and chickpeas. Of course, there's some more familiar items on the menu. The Bairro Alto is a top destination for the tapas set, who like to nibble their way through local eateries instead of sitting the whole night for full meals in one spot. Popular choices here might include a sampling of olives, sausage, cheese with a delightful pumpkin topping, bread and oil. A sort of hash blend of fish, onion, and potato is also a typical choice. One dish with a backstory is pistache de nata in the upper left. These custard tarts, filled with sweet egg cream and covered in flaky pastry dough, got their start because of the clergy's need for starched shirts. Before modern laundry additives, nuns and monks would use egg whites to stiffen their clothes. This meant there were a lot of egg yolks left over, so to avoid them going to waste, they were instead used as a major ingredient in desserts. The monks of the Hieronymus created a secret recipe to perfect their custard tarts, which they began selling to generate income. When the monastery closed, this egg tart recipe was later sold to the owners of a Balame bakery in 1837. It remains a secret today. Only 6 people know the exact recipe, and their product is differentiated from similar pastries made elsewhere by the trademark name, pastéis de Belém. Caldo verde in the lower left is a traditional soup that's served in local homes as well as restaurants. In fact, it's hard to avoid it. The base is potatoes and kale, which is then flavored with heavy doses of olive oil, salt, and sliced sausage. What will definitely be on the menu everywhere is their signature seafood bacalhau, or salted cod. It's served up with a bit of irony. They don't have cod off their own coast. At one point, the North America's East Coast was a primary fishing ground for the tasty fish, which they needed to salt to preserve for the long journey home. There are reportedly nearly 400 different recipes starring the whitefish. Most popular are au gratin, baked in the oven with sour cream, cheese, and a bechamel sauce, sautéed, or as croquettes. While some consider cod to be a national dish, others argue that honor goes to the sardine, which is typically served grilled. The lowly sardine is elevated to all new levels in Lisbon at an omnipresent chain shop called the Fantastic World of Portuguese Sardines, where owners say their shop, dedicated to the small herring like fish, is, quote, a magical world of fantasy that pays homage to the sardine through a multi-sensory experience of the magic of Portuguese canned goods. It's no wonder the Comar Company's uniquely styled stores won the Judge's Choice Award at the 2022 Creative Retail Awards ceremony. Unlike the Carmel Convent of the upper neighborhood, down below there was nothing left to save where the former huge royal palace had stood for hundreds of years by the shore of the Tagus River. What didn't topple during the quake was completely razed by the ensuing tsunami and fires. Pombal transformed the ruined area into a mighty symbolic entrance to the restored city by creating an immense open square, nearly 600 by 600 feet, called the Square of Commerce. In the center, Pombal installed a magnificent statue of King Jose I, who was the reigning monarch at the time of the quake, and who had appointed Pombal to rebuild the city. The king is dramatically portrayed crushing snakes. This depiction of bravery, though, is a little at odds with stories of how the king was not at home when the disaster struck, but was so traumatized by the tragic event that he never slept in a stone building again, preferring tents and wooden structures. Pombal worked himself into the monument with a bronze medallion on the statue's pedestal. He features more prominently, though, on the massive Parisian-style arch gateway behind, leading into the city proper. Although Lisbon's version of the Arc de Triomphe was not completed in Pombal's lifetime, it was part of his vision for celebrating the city's rebirth, and his likeness stands on one of the side pillars. For a sense of deja vu, look from the plaza across the Tagus River. Here you'll think you've been transported across the Atlantic. On the southern side of the river, looking up, way up, you will be reminded of an iconic feature from Brazil, the Christ the Redeemer statue that overlooks Rio de Janeiro. It's no coincidence that two countries have similar monuments. If the adage that imitation is the highest form of flattery is correct, well, then Lisbon's Christ the King statue sends a big kudos to its former colony. Reportedly, the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon visited Rio in 1934. One look at the famous landmark and he was smitten and wanted one for his city. It took several years to get support, funding, and approval, and a world war for an excellent justification to undertake the project. But in 1949, work finally started. A key impetus that led to construction was keeping a promise made in 1940 during a gathering of bishops who vowed, if Portugal is spared from the war, a monument to the Sacred Heart of Jesus will be erected facing Lisbon. Well, given that Portugal stayed largely neutral during World War II, and so was spared destructive effects of the war, they made good on their pledge, and they did so in grand style. Lisbon's tribute is, between base and statue, 360 feet tall, more than double the height of Rio's, though the latter sits atop a mountain, not a bluff. Both have the same span of outstretched hands, though, about 92 feet. Look to the right of the monument, and you might think you've been beamed over to San Francisco. Again, no coincidence. The bridge spanning the Tagus River does bear a strong resemblance to California's Bay Bridges, and that is by design, as architects took what worked in California and incorporated it into the Portuguese span. It was built by the American Bridge Company, which modeled it on their San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, then painted it the same color as its sister span, the Golden Gate Bridge. Like the San Francisco area, Lisbon is obviously a seismic risk zone, and so the same earthquake survival concepts had to be taken into account in its bridge's construction. The distinctive paint, called International Orange, is specially formulated to protect the bridge from rusting due to salt spray off the ocean. It actually came about as a sort of fluke. When steel arrived for the Golden Gate, it had a reddish-orange primer protective coat. The architect considered it more aesthetically appealing than the typical gray or black coating of other bridges, and made the case to use the unusual color, arguing it complemented the natural setting in addition to providing good visibility for passing ships, even in fog. The designers opted for the same look for Lisbon's first bridge, an engineering feat that holds the record for the longest suspension bridge in Europe at 1.4 miles. Originally called the Salazar Bridge after the Portuguese dictator in power when it was completed in 1966, the bridge was later renamed the 25th of April in honor of the peaceful coup that overthrew the regime on that date in 1974. The uprising ended more than 40 years of dictatorship in Portugal and ushered in democracy. Almost no shots were fired, and red carnations were given to the soldiers by grateful crowds to celebrate the overthrow. Soldiers placed the buds inside their guns or pinned them on their uniforms, leading to the event being identified by the seeming oxymoron, the Carnation Revolution. I like to end all of my programs with the words of Dr. Seuss. Sometimes you don't appreciate the moment until it becomes a memory. And I like to add to that to say, always remember to celebrate the moments and treasure the memories. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of the capital city of our nearest neighbors across the Atlantic. If you'd like to learn more about the country, look for my Portugal Beyond Lisbon and Through the Ages program. Should you have any questions about this presentation, email me or use the contact page on my website, which is also where you can visit any of my other European or USA destinations. And don't forget to check my Programs tab to see flyers describing each of my programs, available in video format, in addition to a listing of which ones I'll be presenting in person and where. You should contact your library or community center to confirm which version they are making available. I also recommend you check out my Tips tab for the latest regulations kicking in for both domestic and international travel, especially for acceptable forms of identification and documents we will need to travel to the UK and EU countries. Obrigada, or thank you for taking this journey with me.